Okay, so this is Southwest Writers meeting the 23rd of November. And our speaker tonight is Judith Avila, and she's going to be talking about writing your memoir, An Act of Courage. And Judith is the New York Times, WSJ, and USA Today best-selling co-author of Code Talker, the first and only memoir by one of the original Navajo code talkers of World War II. She's been inspired by New Mexico's cultural mix. She lives here in Albuquerque on the East Mountain side with her partner Latham and 4 dogs. So with no more ado, I am going to turn this over to Judith.
Thank you, Brenda.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm kind of excited about writing about memoir. And I have to tell you, I have some mixed emotions too. I mean, speaking about memoir, see, there I go. Because you people who are here tonight are probably interested in writing your own memoir. And I think that is such an act of courage. Now, I wrote someone else's memoir, Chester Nez, who was a Navajo code talker. And that was fun and informative, and it changed my life. But it wasn't the same act of courage it takes to write your own memoir. So I want to start out by talking about story, and then we'll get into what I think needs to happen with a memoir. Now, be aware what I say is not the be all and end all. When someone tells you they know everything you need to do to be a good writer, don't believe them. I remember someone telling me when I was a brand new writer, you can't use exclamation points very often, maybe one in a whole novel. And I believed them at the time. Well, since then, I've realized that things are a little looser and the rules are not really rules. You do your own thing, but I'm going to tell you what worked for me. But first, I want to say how powerful story is. I mean, story is the hope of the world, I think. Our whole hope for our future lies in understanding each other's stories. Story in any form, whether it's books, oral storytelling, movies, is the most moving form of communication. And through story, we learn to care about people other than ourselves, other than our friends and family. It doesn't even matter whether the characters we grow to love in a book and to identify with are people we will ever meet. What matters is the compassion we gain from knowing them, in knowing their story, and the fact that we care about them and care about what happens to them is really important. Now, every life is a story. I've had many people say to me, oh, my life is boring. I could never write a memoir. But every life is a story if you know how to tell it. And the history of our world is a grand story. And watching the hummingbirds at your feeder is a story too. There are stories within stories within stories, kind of like those double reflecting mirrors that create a never-ending receding image. Learning about each other is absolutely essential, and it will resurrect the future of our country, the future of our world. So keep in mind that writing a memoir is important. It's your story. You're one of many people, and we're all important, but it will be a struggle. I mean, life involves struggle. We all know that. That's nothing new. So writing about your own life, being honest, trying not to try too hard to make yourself look like you're perfect, well, that's a struggle and that's a challenge. And let's face it, telling your story is an act of ego. I mean, you want others to appreciate it and you want them to care about you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to accomplish that. Now, when I wrote Chester's memoir with him, I recorded all of his stories for about 3 years. And then I used them to construct a book. And it wasn't the same kind of thing as having to tell your own story and having to be careful about how you make yourself appear. But I tell you what, over those 3 years, I grew to really love Chester. He was a wonderful man, and I wanted my readers to love him as much as I did. So I really was careful about telling his story because I didn't want him to come across as conceited, which he wasn't by any means. And I wanted him to come across clearly as the kind of laudable human being that he was. Okay. I'm going to talk first about constructing a memoir. And a little bit of this slide is cut off on my display, but we'll go through the items so you'll know what it says. Primary to constructing any memoir, you have to determine at least these 5 things. And this is my opinion again, you may not agree, but this is what makes it possible for me. Number 1, and most important, is determining the core truth of your story. What is the main principle or the main thing that you want your audience to come away with after reading this book? Do you want to teach them? Do you want to complain? We'll talk more about core truth. But you have to determine that, because that determines how everything else weaves into your story. It gives you focus. Okay? You have to choose and develop your characters. And of course, if you're writing a nonfiction, your characters are real. In your memoir, your characters are real. Although it might be interesting to write a memoir with some unreal characters, but you want to choose your characters, who's going to be in there, and develop them. Then you want to ground your story in location. This is both place and time in history. If a reader is reading your story and they don't know where you are or where they are when they're reading your story, it's hard to really get involved. Then you want to select events that support your core truth. The events in your life, there may be, well, there are obviously thousands and thousands of events in a life, but you have to be selective. And then, of course, you have to sit down and write. So let's start with finding the core truth of your story. Okay. Boy, it looks as though someone here found a core truth they weren't too happy about. Anyway, in order to find your core truth, you have to know what you believe. And even if you think what you believe doesn't interest other people, we are all trying to find meaning from this life, from our existence. We are all maybe a little concerned about how we'll be remembered. And of course, writing a memoir can have a big impact on that. So no matter what you think of the actual events of your life, you do have something that is of potential interest to a readership, your thoughts on life itself. And even if your life is full of adventures, they beg to be written, the first thing you need to do in penning a memoir is to unearth your primary defining idea or belief. You have to know why you're writing this memoir, why you're writing it, and you have to know what you want people to get from it. It can be something as simple as the importance of kindness, or something as complex as analyzing the effects of racial injustice. And if you're doing a racial injustice story, how are you looking at it? Are you believing that certain races are not treated well and are not given a level playing field? Or are you thinking that the dominant race is being erased by other races? You have to make your beliefs clear. And when you have them clear in your head, then your entire book points and focuses in that direction. In Code Talker, the defining event that made people interested in reading about Chester was the fact that he was one of the original 29 Navajo Code Talkers. Wow, I was really lucky there, because people want to read it just to get the story of the Code Talkers. But for me, that experience, the fact that he was a Code Talker, didn't really define the man. It was far from it. I felt the core truth of Code Talker had to be that people who are considered by a large part of society to be marginal can step up and be of the utmost importance. I wanted readers of Code Talker to like and respect Chester the way I did, and I wanted them to get his importance and the importance of non-mainstream cultures to their country. In writing your memoir, if you're very lucky, you may immediately know what your core truth is going to be. But if you're not immediately clear on what it is, ask yourself questions. Things like, do you prefer to dwell on negative or positive outcomes? Kind of life sucks versus life is great. Do you feel the need to expose some injustice? Do you want to talk about a personal triumph? Do you want to express your beliefs and gain proponents for your way of thinking? Maybe you're very serious about religion, or maybe you believe in a benevolent universe and you want to spread that belief. Do you want to make people angry about some cause? Do you want to scare people about some condition or some event? Do you want to propose a solution to some type of problem? Jot down anything from these types of questions and anything else that is important to you. And after jotting down your thoughts, decide which of the items you've listed best suits your approach to life. When you read your notes over, what pops out as important? If nothing seems to rise above everything else, then leave it for a while. Rather than working actively, roll the different approaches around in your brain. No pressure. Eventually, something will emerge as the first thought you have when you think about writing your memoir. Chances are this thought is directly connected to your core truth. And knowing this truth provides the focus for all the rest of your writing. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick reading, and I will do several readings during this presentation because I always find that having a direct example of how something is done well is a big help and maybe a greater help to learning than just hearing someone talk about how they did it. So I'm going to read from The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is a story about a really, really horrible, tough childhood. And it's funny because she had brilliant but criminally negligent parents. They loved her, but they loved themselves more. They didn't want to have to work. They'd quit their job. The kids might go for days without food. I mean, they were parents who believed that they were number one. And Jeanette and her siblings went through many, many horrible times because of this. But her approach was every single thing she conquered made her stronger. So her memoir came off as positive. And I want to read the very beginning of the memoir so you get a feeling for the way she was approaching her life. I was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Mom's gestures were all familiar. The way she tilted her head and thrust out her lower lip when studying items of potential value. The way her eyes widened with childish glee when she found something she liked. Her long hair was streaked with gray, tangled and matted, but still, she reminded me of the mom she'd been when I was a kid, swan diving off cliffs and painting in the desert and reading Shakespeare to us aloud. When she looked up, I was overcome with panic that she'd see me and call out my name, and that someone else on the way to the same party would spot us together, and Mom would introduce herself and my secret would be out. I slid down in the seat and asked the driver to turn around and take me home to Park Avenue. I hated myself. Okay, well, she's showing us here what she's been dealing with, but she's also showing us by beginning here that she lives in Park Avenue. She managed to get an education, a job. She is going to a party. She has obviously pulled herself out of the dumpster diving society. She looked at every event in her life as a way to learn something and become stronger. Okay, now I want to give you someone who took a pretty opposite approach. This is from The Liars Club by Mary Carr. Okay, she, much more than Jeanette, used her misfortunes to show us how she was a victim. And I found her approach interesting. The book was good, but I so preferred Jeanette Walls' book, The Glass Castle. Now, this is The Liars Club by Mary Carr. She has parents similar to Jeanette's, but the protagonists didn't grow with each misfortune. Here, she's writing about her older sister, Licia. whom she didn't really like very much. Okay, I studied Dad's kitchen floor, gold and ivory crosshatch, like Italian tile. Licia had paid her handyman to install it that very morning. She was prone to flashy presents. She'd even shelled out my graduate tuition first term, doubtless thinking it her duty. That lie of responsibility was part of the wedge that lay between us as sisters. Okay, it's kind of an evident approach here. She's taking some generous gifts that her sister has given, the new kitchen floor for her dad. My gosh, her tuition for graduate school, and she's criticizing her sister with them. A very different approach, obviously a very different focus and a very different core truth. Now I'm going to read a little excerpt from another memoir I thought was memorable and something that I think you'll find interesting. This is from Crazy Brave by Joy Harjo. And Joy is a Native American who became Poet Laureate of the United States. She was Poet Laureate for 3 successive terms. No one else has ever done that, and no other Native American was Poet Laureate before her. Her core truth is our interwoven dependence upon each other and nature. And it's revealed, I feel, in these opening pages of Crazy Brave. Once, I traveled far above the earth. The beloved planet we call home was covered with an elastic web of light. I watched in awe as it shimmered, stretched, dimmed, and shined, shaped by the collective effort of all life within it. Dissonance attracted more dissonance. Harmony attracted harmony. I saw revolutions, droughts, famines, and the births of new nations. The most humble kindnesses made the brightest lights. Nothing was wasted. Okay, once you have determined what your focus, your core truth is going to be for your book, you need to think about your characters. Okay, you will be the subject, of course, of your memoir, and the characters you interact with will become the conduit through which your message is delivered for maximum impact. Reveal the characters slowly. Don't do 2 or 3 paragraphs, a data dump, and figure, hey, my audience knows these characters now. I'm done with that. No, use backstory. Show how they interact with you and with other people. Use their dialogue. Reveal them little by little. Reveal what's important to your characters. Show their flaws, very important. We'll get into that. Show their struggles, something we can all relate with, and celebrate the resolution of these struggles. And finally, have the characters interact realistically. Now, first, let's look at what can be important to your characters. Okay, there could be an endless list. I mean, for some characters, family is everything. For others, money is everything. For others, animals are everything. There are all kinds of characters, and for your reader to be drawn in, they need to understand your characters. Okay. Now, your antagonist is important too. If you have an antagonist in your memoir, You may not, but don't forget about them. And don't forget about backstory, because many memoirs only cover a section of your life. You know, you can write multiple memoirs. No law says you can't, and many people have. But if you're only covering a section of your life, for the reader to understand you, they need some backstory. And here's an example of backstory revealing something important to the character who is the main character, the protagonist in his memoir. This is from You Don't Have to Say You Love Me by Sherman Alexie. Now, Sherman Alexie is one of the most clever writers and speakers I have ever encountered. He's quite amazing. And in this little excerpt, he quickly gives us the backstory of his Native American nation, his race, of boarding school, things that color his whole life. And the backstory, he is watching an elder talk about boarding school, forced boarding school. One elder, over 70 years old, stood and said, sometimes white men would take you into private rooms and they would beat you. And you'd be happy to only get slapped and punched, because sometimes those white men would take you into those private rooms and rape you. Sometimes it was one white man. Sometimes it was more. The elder stopped speaking. He could not continue. He stood without crying and trembled. And Alexie observed, a person can be genocided, can have every connection to his past severed, and live to be an old man whose rib cage is a haunted house built around his heart. I thought that was amazing. Now, your characters, okay, you have to show what they're interested in, but they have to have flaws. And this guy here, well, definitely a flawed being. So you will find, if you admit you have flaws, people will be so sympathetic to you. And it will be the truth. We all do have flaws. So I want to read a quick excerpt from one of the men in one of my critique groups. His name's Phil Jackson, and he used to be a jockey. And the book is called Bred in the Purple. Now, Phil had been thrown from a horse in a race. His back was broken. Here it goes. In my mind, I envisioned the filly leaving the starting gate in proper order. Poor thing, she was so full of life that her bucking fit should have been picked up by me intuitively. I could have shaken the bit in her mouth, leaned back in the saddle, and gotten her to relax. It wasn't her fault she bucked me off. My fault. My own fault. Now, Phil could have said, that damn horse, it threw me off. The horse was dog meat. I wish it would break a leg. No, that wouldn't have been Phil. And everyone in the critique group, in hearing this little excerpt from his memoir, loved him all more than they already did, and realized more strongly what a great man he is. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you one more example of a flawed memoir writer. And this is called Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Also an interesting book. You may have heard about her in the news a few years back. She attended a party at a college that she wasn't even going to, got drunk, passed out, and was sexually abused. And she went to trial, accused the man, and so on. The fact that I spelled subpoena, S-U-B-P-E-E-N-A, may suggest I am not qualified to tell this story, but all court transcripts are at the world's disposal. All news articles online. This is not then ultimate truth, but it is mine, told to the best of my ability. If you want it through my eyes and ears, to know what it felt like inside my chest, what it's like to hide in the bathroom during trial, this is what I provide. I give what I can. You take what you need. I love that. She right away, right off the bat, presents herself as possibly a flawed narrator, but you're drawn in and you immediately think, oh, this poor girl, she sounds great. I'd like to be friends with her. Okay, we've talked about characters with flaws now. How about character struggle? As I've said, we all struggle. So let yourself struggle in the book. People will identify with that. Now, a little quickie from Crazy Brave again by Joy Harjo. I could hear my abandoned dreams making a racket in my soul. I wanted more, and I didn't know how I would get it. My days were consumed with the drudgery of survival. I took care of the household, made meals of beans, fried potatoes, and cheap meat. I negotiated with a husband who was essentially a boy. He didn't know how to grow up. His father had abandoned the family, and he had no father map. Nicely put. And yes, she struggled. And yes, it was interesting to read about. Okay, well, if you have characters who aren't perfect and have flaws and struggle, well, somewhere there's going to be a resolution, or maybe some mini resolutions and a larger resolution. And it doesn't have to be something like winning the Nobel Peace Prize or an Oscar. It can be positive or negative, depending on the way you look at the world. Positive could be a life well lived and beliefs adhered to. Negative could be hopes dashed. Generally, the resolution, the large resolution, will coincide with the author's core belief. I'm going to read you a little excerpt from Code Talker, my book with Chester Nez. Somehow, I weathered all the challenges, all the transformations of my life, managing to survive, trying to live the right way. But there's one thing that's especially good. My fellow Code Talkers and I have become part of a new oral and written tradition, a Navajo victory, with our culture contributing to our country's defeat of a wily foe. The story of the Code Talkers has been told on the checkerboard and the reservation and recorded in the pages of history books forever. Our story is not one of sorrow, like the Long Walk and the Great Livestock Massacre, but one of triumph. All right. One more resolution for you, because we left poor Joy Harjo with her husband who couldn't grow up and couldn't afford to help her pay for food. So let's see how she ended her struggle. It was the spirit of poetry who reached out and found me as I stood there at the doorway between panic and love. There are many such doorways in our lives. Some are small and hidden in the ordinary. Others are gaping and obvious. The spirit of poetry came to me. It is a kind of resurrection light. It is the tall ancestor spirit who has been with me since the beginning, or a bear, or a hummingbird. It is 100 horses running the land in a soft mist, or it is a woman undressing for her beloved in firelight. It is none of these things. It is more than everything. I followed poetry. All righty. So we need our characters to interact. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about that because dialogue and character interactions are one of the more difficult things for most writers. Okay. And of course, dialogue and interactions with other characters are an important way to show the reader what your characters are like and what you, as the hero of your own memoir, are like. Of course, you won't remember conversations word for word, but remember the circumstances and the emotions involved, and make the dialogue and physical interactions true to the characters involved as you remember them. This is your memoir, memory, your memories of your life events. What you say is law in your memoir. Don't let your characters always speak in complete sentences, please. That gets kind of old and kind of dull, and in real life, we use lots of sentence fragments. Use contractions. Most people use them when they talk. Maybe if you don't, and that could differentiate your character from other characters if they never use a contraction. Let your character's speech reveal the character, leading to a greater understanding. Do some of your characters swear a lot? Are others very conservative in the words they choose, even when under stress? Do some use annoying phrases over and over and over, like, it is what it is? Let the reader see this repetition. Let the reader be annoyed along with you. Avoid things that slow down conversations, like having the characters repeat each other's name with every sentence. Jack, come over here. Oh, Julie, what are you doing? Oh, Jack, look, I'll show it to you. Now, you establish their talking. You don't need to use their name over and over and over. Some of your characters may even be defined by improper grammar. That's okay. Use it. Okay, I want to show you what I find to be a very innovative and revealing bit of dialogue between characters. So once again, I'm calling on Jeanette Walls in Glass Castle. Okay, she is revealing a little bit about her older sister, but this is mostly about her interaction with her dad, who is an interesting man, if not the greatest father. Here goes. I think there's something under our bed, I said to Lori, my sister. It's merely a figment of your overly active imagination, Lori said. She talked like a grown-up when she was annoyed. I tried to be brave, but I had heard something. In the moonlight, I thought I saw it move. Holding my pillow over my head for protection, I ran into the living room where Dad was reading. "What's up, mountain goat?" he asked. He called me that because I never fell down when we were climbing mountains. Sure-footed as a mountain goat, he'd always say. Using a flashback. Nothing, probably, I said. Maybe I saw something in the bedroom. Dad raised his eyebrows. But it was probably just a figment of my overly active imagination. Did you get a good look at it? He asked. Not really. Was it a big, old, hairy son of a bitch with the damnedest looking teeth and claws? That's it. And did it have pointed ears and evil eyes and fire in them? And did it stare at you all wicked like? He asked. Yes, yes. You've seen it too? Better believe I have. It's that old ornery bastard demon. If that sneaky son of a gun thought it was going to terrorize Rex Wall's little girl, it had, by God, another think coming. Go fetch my hunting knife, Dad said. I thought that was a very revealing piece of the book. Okay, we've got our characters up there and they're interacting and speaking, and we need to ground our story in location. Now, is your story a city story, a country story, an outer space story? It's important that your reader know this if your reader's going to come along for the ride. So use all of your senses in describing where you are. Location is not just physical, it's also your place in time. Is this current? Is this 50 years ago? Things would be different if it's 50 years ago. So you need to show us the way things were seen and evaluated back then. I'm going to give a quick read by Christine Mulvey, who wrote a book, a beautiful book called Mine to Carry. And she talked about a time when she was a young girl, pregnant, and her family sent her away. I'm standing now in long grass and buttercups, the faint scent of wild mint in the air. There's a softness to the place that is more than the softness of moss and damp. I lift my gaze, and there, not 2 feet from me, is a statue of Our Lady. Something about her, almost smile, the mercy in her eyes, something about the way she leans towards me, draws me. Slowly, the green darkness of her gaze becomes a pool of quiet deep inside me, a finger of tenderness, a warmth that reaches to embrace me, right in the place where the ache of the emptiness I carry has, until now, never felt touched. And another great example of setting the scene, the location for your book, is from Isaac Dennison, who wrote Out of Africa. She's a wonderful writer. The geographical position and the height of the land combined to create a landscape that had not its like in all the world. There was no fat on it and no luxuriance anywhere. It was Africa, distilled up through 6,000 feet, like the strong and refined essence of a continent. The colors were dry and burnt, like the colors in pottery. Now, by describing that location, she also brings in the idea of the lack of luxuriance and the fact that things are not going to be easy there in Africa. And that's the way the book goes. All right, here. going to another page and my pages are trying to stick together. Okay, then we've got our location, but what events are we going to choose to use in our story? Now, this, of course, is huge in a memoir. There are so many things that have happened in your life, and you can, the more you think about them, the more turn up in your mind. The more you think about A, B, and C, the more D, E, and F appear. And you could end up with thousands of events, but you don't want every event in your life. You want the events that support your theory about life. So every scene should pull the reader along toward that core truth in your story. If you don't do this, your story will feel like it's jumping from random event to random event and scene. And readers need a sense of momentum of going somewhere if they're going to make that journey with you. So you need to give that to them. Decide how your goals and reactions to the events in your life lead to your core truth. So where do you find these influential events? Well, you need to ask yourself about things. Things like, what people have influenced you? What are your beliefs and your inspirations? What makes you tick? What mistakes have you made? Be honest. What regrets do you have? Ditto, be honest. What adventures have you had? Have you had to overcome obstacles? Well, of course you have. We all have. What have you learned in overcoming them? What conflicts have you had? What successes have you had? And there are many more things you can ask yourself. This is just the beginning of a long list you could make. But in addition to asking yourself about all of these items, and many others, don't stop at the ones I gave you, talk to your siblings and friends about what you remember. It's amazing how two different people will remember the same event totally differently. It really is amazing. And perhaps you want to research what was going on in the world at the time you're talking about, because that may have influenced or may explain or tie into the events of your story. Okay. Now, we've talked about all the things you need to collect and know and envision, but we haven't written anything yet. Okay, we're going to have to write this story. And in doing that, for me, two very important things are deciding where to start and triaging the events you've come up with to only select the ones that will advance your story. Where do you start? Well, if you want to pull the reader in, you need to start with something that's going to catch their interest, that's going to hook them and make them want to be part of this story, make them want to keep reading. Now, in Code Talker, I had a tough time with this because I wanted to talk about Chester's childhood, and yet I felt if I began with that, I might lose a bunch of my readers who were interested in World War II or interested in a hero. So I decided I would start with him on the transport ship on his way to Guadalcanal, the scariest day of his life. And this is from Code Talker by Judith Avila and Chester Nez. November 4th, 1942, approaching Guadalcanal. Nothing ever dried. My damp combat uniform chafed at the back of my neck. Water ran down my forehead and into my eyes. I stood on deck in the dark. Born to the Navajo Nation, now a Marine, I'd never even seen the ocean before enlisting. It was good, being able to sail without feeling squeamish. I tried to concentrate on that and not on where I was heading, but thoughts seeped into my brain like seawater. Like other traditional Navajos, I'd always believed in the right way. Balance must be found, not only between individuals, but between each person and his world. My hands gripped the rail. The ship's steady progress brought me inexorably closer to Guadalcanal. For 3 months, battle had raged there. How could I find any balance in that? Now, in beginning there, I hoped that I would let the reader get a glimpse of what Chester was dealing with in World War II, but also that I'd create some tension and urgency, and also that people would become aware right away of one of Chester's struggles: tradition versus the mainstream world, or the world of being a Marine. Now, you know where to start, because you've thought about something that will bring your reader in and make them want to stay with you. What are you going to do next? Okay, you've gathered all these scenes, you know where your core truth is. You're going to have to triage your scenes. Now, this is never easy. You've written down a whole bunch of things you want to include, but you need to decide, are they all pertinent to my story? There are 3 types of scenes you'll run into, and maybe more than 3, but I'm thinking some scenes will be crucial. They are absolutely essential to the story. Some will be revealing. They'll show your character or the character of some other person in the story who's important. And then some will just be padding. Okay. Some years back, we had an editor named Liz Shire come to one of our conferences, and she wrote a memoir called Never Simple. And this is a crucial scene. Her memoir talks about the challenges of being raised by and taking care of a bipolar mother. Here it is. Elizabeth, she said softly through the door. I was in the bathtub, scrunched against the back wall, my head thudding hotly. You can't be in there by yourself with the door locked? What if there was a fire? There won't be a fire, I said defiantly. Her voice turned sorrowful. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but I can't have you locking doors behind you. I have mischief here, and if you don't come out, I'm going to take her down to Dr. Howell's and have her put to sleep. My heart filled with lava. I worship that dog, a hyperactive Maltese with an unflattering crew cut. He won't do that. Softer still. He will, honey. I'll tell him she bit one of the kids in the building, and he'll have to. It's the law. I knew that she was right. Even other adults didn't cross my mother. Mischief whimpered. I unfolded myself from the tub and unlocked the door. Okay, a crucial scene to set up what she's dealing with here. And then there are revealing scenes that maybe divert your protagonists from their forward path, maybe introduce some sort of problem that she's going to have to overcome. Maybe you show with revealing scenes how the protagonist has gotten back on the path she had been trying to follow. And then there's padding. Those scenes may be nicely written, they may even be beautiful, but if they don't advance your story toward your message, you need to get rid of them. Keep triage categories 1 and 2, the crucial and the revealing, but get rid of category 3, padding. This will improve the clarity of your book's vision. And once you've got your scenes triage, go back through the ones that made the cut and polish them, bringing them to life. I have one last thing that I'd like to say about your memoir. Please, as a memoirist, resist the urge to try to make yourself appear perfect. It's a temptation, I know, but no one can sympathize with a perfect protagonist, especially one who is self-proclaimed perfect. Enjoy the process of writing your memoir and have fun discovering your story. Thank you.